teacher, we had a meeting in which we addressed assessments, and I will get into that later. However, we're kind of teaching in very different ways right now, and the district-wide PDs are not very fluid in terms of their focus on on planning for your students and building lessons. They just discuss like a couple of methods pretty much during every PD. So I thought it would be a good idea for me to create my own meeting in which I reflected upon my year, and then I solved problems. So I have 5 talking items, okay, in 5 different categories. The first one is behavior. So in terms of the behavior plan, what I have noticed is I want to keep the names on the board. I like doing that, and my principal has been responding to that too very well. The name goes on the board, and then the students get up to 2 checks, and they get a phone call home. What I am going to change with that is the students are going to be able to erase their checks and wipe their name off the board by the end of class. Because what I have noticed is that some of my students are starting to just give up when they feel like they've already dug themselves too far into the hole. So I tried this yesterday, and it worked very well with one of my problem students, Kayshonda. He was like helping me at the end of the day, wiping my board off for me because I had called his mom the day before, and he had gotten very sad. He took kind of almost like a temper tantrum in the basement when I told him his mom had told him to come home. But then, and I don't know if that also, making the phone call was important, but then I'm noticing that I need to give him some chances to improve himself. If I just call home every day, he's going to feel defeated. So, but I did it in a fair way, and that was the way that I managed that. So what I'm going to do is allow the students to have the opportunity to erase their name. And they're going to do that by consistently showing our 3 practices or our 3 rules, which is listening to all directions, raising their hands to talk, and raising their hands to get out of their seat. A lot of kids have trouble with the get out of their seat one. But again, I remind them every time they do, because they'll get out of their seat, and then somebody will touch somebody else, and I say, this is why you have to stay in your seat. And they start to get the logic over time when I'm consistent with it. So if your name gets erased, nothing happens. You won't even get the -5 or the -10. But if your name stays on the board, then you will get a phone call home. If I've called your home at least twice that week, then you will have a detention with me. Now, if your name is on the board at the end of class, you can come and see me at 3:15 sharp and discuss with me why you think your name should not have stayed on the board. Now, this is a discussion. This is sort of like a rebuttal or a way for your voice to be heard if I kind of were making my own little court system in the class or something like that. So the students need to be respectful when they're doing this. If a student pounds on my door, bangs, if a student curses me out, if a student starts talking disrespectfully to me, it ends. I'm calling home. They have to come in nicely and politely and give a clear argument. Now, I will help them with the clear argument and how they can present it, but I think that would be also a good practice for them, and that will transfer into the classroom. Like, how can I speak to Ms. Conflenny to get what I want? Because I find that to be one of the biggest issues, is that kids have been able to kind of get away with just whining or, shouting out or getting defensive. Getting defensive is one of the big ones. Like, even with kids I don't have in the hall, like, well, where are you supposed to be right now if you're not in class? Oh, get out of my face, or, just things that they'll do to kind of bully or be defensive, you know what I mean, so that they don't have to deal with whatever is coming, whatever the consequence may be. And so I want my students to really realize that there are much more effective ways to advocate for yourself than to just get so defensive that somebody doesn't want to deal with you. So let's see. So I'm changing this. I already explained the reason. So my second talking item is changes to the curriculum. Now, I have decided to wait to write answers on the board at certain moments. Now, maybe if I'm modeling something, I'll write the answer on the board. But I've noticed some students will copy or wait for an answer to be on the board before they share. So, for example, we have been learning estar, which is one of our to be verbs. I already taught them ser, the other to be verb. And this one is to be verb for a few different things, but one of them is location. So we're describing where we are in school, and we're using our imagination and pretending like maybe we're in the bathroom instead of class, or in El Gimnasio, you can kind of see here, in the gym, cafeteria, office, hallway, or outside. And then the students needed to write their own answers in, and then we went around the room. And I started by asking a student, where are you? Donde estás tú? So they have to practice the first person singular, the second person singular. And then the other classmates are responsible for listening and then writing out, and somebody raises their hand to recap or speak out what, like basically what the other student said. So like where the other student is in the third person. So like if one student says, yo estoy en clase, during his or her turn, then I ask students, okay, ¿dónde está Shalea, for example? And then someone else would raise her hand and say, ella está en clase, she's in class. And all I did was write out the student's name so that like nobody, misspelled a student's name. So I kept the question on the board in the third person singular, but I did not write out any of the answers yesterday because the job of the students was to listen. And now I'm still differentiating because I have the structures right here. So it's not like they won't have access to the structure or to the vocabulary because the vocabulary is right here. So basically it's just the student's duty to listen and then match, whatever sentence stem with whatever object, or I guess not object, would be prepositional phrase because it has an N in there. So then you just have like the subject and the verb, okay, and then the ending stem that they would have to connect. So they'd have to listen to each other. So I found that worked well because they had to listen. Another thing, my curriculum, I do like how I present new vocabulary on the first day. The second day, I scramble it up a little bit on the pictures and the words so that they have to see if they remember what it means, but I still give them a little guide with the word bank. Now, on the second day, the idea is to complete or review the dialogues, but I like incorporating these class surveys like what I did yesterday with the whole where are you, so I'm going to continue class surveys for most things unless it doesn't apply to something, but I think for the most part it should. Then the third day, I did start this last week, I started a new verb to build on the first verb. I spent a lot of time with Sarah to be, because I thought it would just wanted them to really get into the Spanish. But last week I did vivir to live and hablar to talk. And then on the third day the first 2 days I taught vivir. Wednesday and Thursday I taught hablar. And then Friday we had our quiz, our independent quiz. Now I was able to gauge speaking and listening informatively. I didn't do it summatively, but I was able to see which students were understanding what I was saying. And I also addressed students in the hallway to see if they were really getting it because they know the day's objective. So that helps them kind of figure out what I'm asking them. But if I don't have an objective in front of me or any of the translations in front of me, that's when I can really see if a student's mastered it. And some of them have and some of them haven't. So that's where I'm really able to see who still needs more help. But the Friday quiz does gauge like whether or not they're understanding things because I give them a descriptive paragraph with like a lot of the vocabulary that we've learned over the course of the advisory, questions that we've learned from previous weeks along with the prior weeks, along with the questions from this week. And I prepare them on Thursday by combining the two verbs of that week and like kind of juxtaposing them. So it's like there'll be little short descriptions that the class will read, and we had about 6 short descriptions. And we asked questions using those 2 interrogatives, que for what and donde for where, over and over again. And that also let me see how phonetically fluent the students were as well. I'm also bringing students in a lot right now during lunchtime because I have some failing students, and I'm bringing in students. So like the other day I noticed these boys, boom, they understood everything. These girls came in, they were reading, they read well phonetically, but they weren't answering questions quickly. And they seemed a little bit lost. So now I know that those girls are struggling a little bit. And I really honestly believe the reason is that they're not paying enough attention in class because they're perfectly capable and they do not have IEPs. So I really think it's just they're not paying attention. So I did discuss that with them. So we're going to see as they start to pay attention. The one girl loves to write answers on the board. She's not really going to be writing answers on the board right now until she focuses more on what her classmates are saying. Because she'll write answers that someone else gives her. And I told her no, she needs to come up with her own answers now. So that was a way for me to kind of like through discipline I know it's negative, but it's pushing her so she knows she can't just, the goal is not, I'm writing on the board. The goal is I'm learning Spanish. So the independent quizzes, one thing I wanted to address that I noticed is that because sometimes students are copying, I am now writing different quizzes for different kids. So I will make different stories or slight adjustments to the same story maybe for some of them. That's another way for me to also differentiate. So I will make the vocabulary a little bit harder and the sentence structures a little bit harder for some of the students that are more advanced. Like I will add more like ands and buts into my sentence to make compound sentences, for example, for some of the more advanced students. For some of the less advanced students, I'll keep the sentences more simplistic. I'll use cognates for all the students so they can learn new vocabulary through the readings, but like for some more advanced students, I'll use vocabulary that's not cognate based, but that they wouldn't know in and of itself, but that they can figure out through context clues in the sentences that they're reading. Okay, next. I also was really able to review the data. So that's all data-based. Like I go over the lessons each day. I also get data from their independent assessments that are summative. I also get data just by listening to them respond orally in the hallway. That's kind of like informal data, but it's honestly some of the most effective data that I get from them. Because it's like, it's real world. Do you get this or you're not? And then so my third talking item was discussing assessments for novice, mid, and high, which is not something that I really need to focus on right now because I only have them for 10 weeks, so they pretty much are at the novice low level. And then I'm seeing like my personal goals for phonetic fluency and for understanding some basic beginner conversational questions and some basic concepts. Like I really want them to be able to identify the subject pronouns, and that's something that I tweak a little bit when I teach them something new. I may not teach them, like I gave them a couple new verbs in their readings and didn't teach them to them, but use heavy context clues and put like yo there so they know that it's something with like I, for example. Another thing. What was I going to say? So we're discussing that and how next year I'm going to have them all year. So how I can get them from novice low to novice high, or even from novice low to low intermediate. And I think some of the students will be able to reach the low intermediate level by next year, and the others will be at novice high. So I want to talk to her about ways that I can assess that for next year, just to think for planning for next year. My fourth talking item is my professional development this year. So this year I had 4 professional development sessions, district-wide sessions where all the foreign language teachers went to a school. They basically talked to us about immersion techniques for language, which I listened to. It's sort of like use authentic texts, and they pretty much just tell us that. And then they show us some examples of authentic texts. I try to use authentic text sometimes. I also create some of my own because the kids are a little bit low level. So but I create texts that are culturally based. So I'll talk about a kid in Mexico, what he goes through. Or like I used an example of a kid in Puerto Rico because a lot of Puerto Ricans will move to the United States. But here's this kid in Puerto Rico that his dad lives in New York and his mom lives in Puerto Rico, for example. And then I try to create pictures like when I did Mexico, I included this woman from Oaxaca, Mexico, because I wanted the kids to know that Mexico is actually really diverse and that there are indigenous Mexican people. Because, sometimes they might just think of Mexican as one thing. So that was really important. And I also use maps, which is an authentic text. We also do circling. We talk about circling there, which is where you ask a yes or no question, then an either or question, and then you use an interrogative. And I do that with my students to model. Other than that, the Ps don't really help me with how to make my lessons fluid or how to plan in a broader context. They just give me a couple techniques. So I kind of have to go elsewhere for that. And that's kind of why I'm doing this personal video. Then understanding cultural, ethnic, gender, and learning differences. For gender, for example, I notice the girls, because they're so young, I like to talk to them a lot about, I think sometimes because they're their own person, they look at other people and they think, you have this, 1 second, Marvin, you have this, and I don't have this. And so it's kind of like accepting your own beauty and seeing the absolute beauty in your beauty and the fact that we are so diverse, because everybody would look boring if everybody looked the same. I mean, there'd be nothing beautiful about anybody if everybody looked the same. So I kind of just say that to them very, very matter-of-factly, and I think it really helps them, and just giving them those compliments. Ethnic differences, cultural differences. I'm really trying to understand the kids in their neighborhood. I go around a lot. I walk around. There's another teacher in the school. I've been involved in her play, just to see different ways of acting and performing that are local in this area. I've also been trying to. The students honestly are diverse in a lot of ways, like their family lives, their backgrounds. So I try to look at them as individuals now more than anything. But I still try to understand in the general, broader context of culture, like what their culture is like and stuff. And one thing I have noticed growing up in Pittsburgh, growing up in the North, for example, I was baptized Presbyterian, so a lot of the students I know are Baptist. So I've been asking a lot of questions about that, and I've gone to a couple Baptist services, which I really enjoyed because it's very everybody's together and they hug you and they care about you, and I really liked that. Just to kind of, and that also gave me a sense of where some of the students come from. Like sometimes I'll say something profound from inside of myself, and they'll be like, "Preach, Miss Confleni, preach," and it's like something that I wasn't used to growing up. So I liked going to those services to kind of see where some of those like cultural elements come from. But I think at this point too, I just need to see my kids like as these different people growing and learning in different ways, and how can I relate to them one-on-one and get an interest involved in their individual interests. I have a student who's Hispanic, who's Mexican too, so that, I just relate to him by engaging with him and talking to him about his life, and I speak with him in Spanish. Learning differences, as I said before, I'm going to be differentiating those quizzes at the end. I also use all four modalities: speaking, reading, writing, and listening. And I'm really going to push next year. And I've done this a little bit my first year, but it wasn't as efficient in terms of like the content. I would take the kids outside and we would do some outdoor things, and we would do things speaking in Spanish. I'm going to do a few more things like that towards the end of the year. But it's challenging sometimes to make sure that those are really meeting the objective in a very clear way. And I think as I become a more experienced teacher, I'll be able to branch out and do more and more and more of that, especially as I gain respect in the school from the students. I'm also taking them on a field trip, though, to the Embassy of Chile next week. So that is, something, too, that, like, allowing them to engage and speak out with one another. And then one final point in regards to that, I also make sure I check kids' IEPs. I have a student sit in the front who has an IEP so that he can always get extra help and such. So thank you. I'm here with Dr. Ballesteros, the Spanish teacher. She teaches the 8th grade at Hart, and I teach 6th and 7th grade. And we're here to talk about assessments and data collection. And so we're going to talk about 2 points. One is a test that the 8th graders had to take that supposedly evaluates or assesses their level. And Dr. Ballesteros is going to talk about that test and whether or not it's effective. And then I was going to ask her about how she would gauge whether or not a student is performing at a certain level scale. So what those scales are. And maybe there's a different one that we do in our district from the one that's more, but you know what I'm talking about, like the A1, A2. So you could talk about that too. Okay.
Okay.
Stumbling, but thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay, well, what I saw with the exam that most students had to take was that it didn't serve any purpose. Because basically, for what I gathered, again, I wasn't part of the construction of the assessment process. I was just given the test and say administered to your students, so I don't know what they're going to do with the data. So I can't possibly talk about what they are going to be doing with the data once they collect it. So I'm not going to go there. But for what I saw, the only data they can collect at this point is the amount of students that belong in which level, in the 3 levels like novice, intermediate, and advanced. Now, assessment by definition is something that allows you to gain some knowledge, or some information about something that you didn't before undergoing whatever you are assessing. Yeah. And the thing is that we already know before our students get assessed if they are novice, intermediate, or advanced. So what's the point of the assessment? You see what I'm saying? Everybody's taking the same exam, and according to the amount of, according to the score that you get, then they place you in novice, intermediate, or advanced. And as I mentioned, well, I already knew my students were novice. I'm pretty sure the teachers who are teaching intermediate, they know the students are intermediate, and so on.
Do you think it's data for the district then to see if the kids are...
I don't know, but the thing is, they don't need to do that if they want to collect the data. They could just ask the teachers. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's like it just makes no sense to make a whole district undergo such an elaborate thing just to get that kind of information. I mean, I think that the assessment should be made in order to learn about something that you didn't know before. For instance, for all those teachers who are teaching novice students, would be my case. Okay, what is it that we can learn from those students? We already know that they're novice, but what is it that we don't know? Well, we don't know within novice the level of the level they have within that thing. We don't know which skills they excel and which skills they don't. We don't know within those skills why they excelled and why they don't. We don't know what type of activities they respond better under test situations and they don't. So those are things that you can get if you take an exam. So those I would, if I had to design a test, I would design it in a way that I could actually assess those things. So I could answer those questions at the end of the test rather than the level.
Okay.
You know.
So like different skill sets, not like just you're at this level, but like
And
how
then
do you do in different categories?
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, the thing is, they do have, the 4 skills were represented there. Yeah, it is true. The reading, the writing, listening, and speaking. The 4 skills were represented, but again, they were represented to measure their level. The activities didn't target specifically a mean of categorizing knowledge, like, okay, why my students are doing better on this, or how they could learn better, or what type of activities are they responding better, or there was no way of measuring any or getting any kind of data from that. So,
can you give an example of a good exam, maybe, or just like, I know it's hard to say like all the details right now, but like a generalized example of what. So like I know that our district has this thing where it goes novice low, novice mid, novice high, but there's more of an international way of gauging with language learning that you discussed with me. That's kind of like A1, A2.
Well, that's the international framework of reference, which is the 3 levels that the whole world is basically working by.
Okay, so that should probably be what we...
Which is A, B, and C. And is within A is A1, A2, and then B1, B2, and then C1, C2. And then basically A is basic usage, so you were able to go by. B is enough knowledge to actually perform a duty. B2 is what is required by any university in the host country of the target language to actually perform any kind of studies. For instance, if I want to study in China, then a Chinese university is going to require me to pass the B2 exam.
I see.
If I want to study in France, then I would have to be able to pass the B2 in French.
So the TOEFL looks for a B2 level, for example?
I don't know. Because it has, I don't know, somebody would have to match it. Besides, I don't think, I haven't looked at it, so I don't know. And then the C's belong to proficiency in performance. So, for instance, if I'm going to perform professionally in the host country of the target language, I would need a C1. And if I'm going to perform professionally at an academic level, I'm going to be required to have a C2.
Okay. And how would you assess for your students? Like,
the exams are very, very qualitative for each one of the skills. So, I'm not going to, but, they're like, you can go into any, you say framework of reference for the languages, and then you just go for any of the levels and then look at the 4 skills. And this, So
it is more qualitative. It's not like it's not like when you're taking a math exam where it's like, this kind of step in this equation or this problem. It's more fluid because it's language.
Well, it's fluid. Like when you take, for instance, the oral exam is not about. I don't know how you can test an oral exam based on my students answering some questions or saying some things to a computer. It doesn't work like that. For instance, I am an examiner for both Cambridge and the Cervantes Institute for English and Spanish, and. For instance, the oral exam is evaluated on a face-to-face basis. Like you actually sit with an examiner and you have a conversation. Then you are evaluated on your listening skills based on the fact that you actually have to interact with another person on a real context. And then your responsive skills are measured not only by your ability to respond to the question that you were asked, but also the fluency of your responses, the accuracy of your vocabulary, the use of language. It's like so many things that determine your accuracy, not only can you answer that question? Or can you describe your best friend? It's not about that, It's like determining the accuracy or the level of linguistic abilities for us, somebody is far more extensive than just, talk to the computer and tell me
I
about
see what
your
you mean.
day.
That's why you're saying like the stamp exam doesn't really. That's one reason why it doesn't.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. I mean, it's like, for me, if I had to take data from our exam, I would only be able to, again, like place them in a level, which we already knew before
Yeah.
they took the exam,
When
so I
I-
don't see the purpose.
When I had to take the AP exams, I always wondered about those too. Because, I mean, even though they're going to some extent, gauge what you can do in Spanish, like, obviously, if you don't know any Spanish, you're not going to pass the AP exam, right? And if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and if you know a lot, you're going to pass. But, like, I had friends who got 5s, and then I got a 4, and it's like, well, did they speak Spanish better than me? I don't really know. Like, I think I was better at being able to express myself because I was very confident in being able to just speak. Whereas my friend was very timid about speaking, and she didn't really have very good oral proficiency skills, but she's very good at memorizing vocabulary and, like, taking exams and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, we could have had the same level. We could have had a slightly different level. It's hard to say. You know what I mean?
And that's what happens when you don't get a rubric in advance, which is another thing. I mean, this exam is based on
Oh, with the
what?
stamp, there was no rubric. Okay, with the AP,
where's
we
the
did get a rubric. But,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like, who's,
Yeah. So
So-
maybe they should really let us know as teachers so we can kind of. I don't want to teach towards the test or anything like that. I like to kind of do my own assessments with the kids too. But
Yeah, exactly. But the thing
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's like you need to know, okay, if this is it's not gonna be a real scenario where we're gonna have a conversation and my students are gonna be evaluated on their ability to actually respond to a real scenario, which is what we teach in the classroom.
that's a really
Then
good point.
Where are they going to be evaluated? So the assessment doesn't correspond with the teaching.
That's
So-
a really good point. And that's what when I did the AP, it was like that. Like somebody would speak at you something, and then you'd have to give like a 2-minute answer.
Like some
Even
of
the
my
test to be a
students
Spanish
actually,
teacher.
some of my students actually, and my students are very, very novice. I mean, they have they have been working with, well, this. I mean, it's like they work with us for 3 months and then they get changed. So I mean, the chances to actually learn something are very, very difficult with this. But they are trying, And the thing is that they all complain systematically on the fact that they were given a problem. All of a sudden, they had to speak about it, and they had been taught in a different way, which is like I tell you something and you respond to what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
and that's what I'm
then
doing too.
I say
yeah.
something and then you respond, which is the real scenario, which is what the whole this framework of referencing is about. It's like the real. Your ability to actually use real language in real context. And nobody's interested in knowing if you can recite Shakespeare in all English.
Yeah, and that's a really
want
good
to know
point.
if
And
you
those
can actually
exams,
go another foot.
Yeah.
That's what the B2 is about. Now, in order to recite Shakespeare in all language, in all English, that would be for the C2, for the academic purposes, but none of these kids are doing that. So basically, this is an exam that is designed as a C2, but it's going to give us, but it's for level of the A's and the B's, but then it's basically going to give us the data that we can't use except for place. I mean, it's like the whole exam makes no sense whatsoever.
I see. That makes a
So-
lot of sense. And that's actually interesting because the exam I took to become a Spanish teacher and the exam I took in high school for AP did that to us too. It wasn't like a fluid conversation. It was like
Yeah.
somebody spoke about something and then you had to respond. For some reason, I didn't do that well on it, even though I always felt like speaking was one of my strong points. I don't know. That was
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Ballesteros.
Well, there was
All right.